Hey, team players, and welcome back. It's the off season in terms of fantasy football, and we are here on your Tuesdays. So, Bob, obviously, fantasy football's regular season is over, but we got two games here that are going to be of great interest for both props and the DFS market. Where do you want to start? Looking back at the past, looking at these two coming up. This is personally my favorite weekend of the whole NFL season is championship weekend.
Well,
I've always loved it.
so there's a lot of points in the scope of the playoffs that we can start at here. I'd like to save the best for last and start with the one that I'm, as a fan of football, I am not really super excited to see this team having advanced, and it's the Kansas City Chiefs.
Okay, why is that?
So, and it's just a personal opinion. It's nothing against the Chiefs themselves, but it's a team that they've been so it's even though their record has shown that they're winning games and they're doing well, there have been times in games where they've been so hot and cold on both offense and on defense that you wonder at times, what is the product that you're actually going to get out of this team. Now, obviously, a Patrick Mahomes-led team is usually, as we've seen over the past several years, is usually going to put up a good deal of is always going to have a chance to win a game, right?
Sure.
And I feel that in this game that we saw last week with Buffalo and Kansas City, that there were two turning points in that fourth quarter of that game that really showed you what Buffalo was about and really showed you what Kansas City was about, right? Okay. So you look at it and you say, okay, that play down in the end zone with the fumble into the end zone and Buffalo getting the ball back, right? And you're like, okay, Kansas City is going to be pretty bad about that. They're going to try their best to come back, and eventually they did. And Buffalo, for their, whatever their
Kansas City was in the lead at that point. Kansas City, when they fumbled that,
if they would have gotten that touchdown, we would
have saw the end of the game in that moment.
The narrative of that game would be a lot different. But that fumble happened, and so now we're on this narrative of Patrick Mahomes coming, like the comeback narrative that has always been about Patrick Mahomes, right? And it took away a lot from the good things that Josh Allen did in that game, and Josh Allen played really well. And until the end of that game, until the final drive of that game, we saw a lot of good things from Josh Allen. So in my opinion, just in general, this is the Manning. This is in the scope of that Manning Brady conversations that we always have. Is there's a point in time where if you're fans of other teams in these divisions, that you kind of get tired of seeing the same team. And this, to be honest with you, the defense is probably the best defense that Kansas City has fielded in the last several years.
Definitely under the Mahomes era. There's no doubt about that.
This offense is one of the worst that we've seen Kansas City field in the last several years. Also so true. The exciting part about the Kansas City Chiefs is watching Patrick Mahomes do what he can do best. And I just don't feel that we're getting the best out of Patrick Mahomes at this point in time because of the talent around him. But the fact that they're going to play Baltimore this week, and we'll talk about that Baltimore game later, is that they could win that game. Like, Baltimore is stacked to the brim with, talent for this game. But there is a logistical chance that this defense of Kansas City, what we saw happen with Houston in the first half, Kansas City is fully capable of doing better than what Houston did in the first half of that game. And then they're perfectly capable of holding that the rest of the game and waiting it out until Patrick Mahomes gets mojo going. This is the first game we saw Travis Kelce do really well in a long time.
Yes, it is.
And Pacheco was amazing again in this game. And so it's just, as a fan of football, I like to see when great players are doing great, but I just want to see different great players in these big games. I'm excited to see Lamar Jackson finally in a big game. I would have been excited to see Josh Allen in a big game. And this is nothing taking away from Mahomes. It's just that I don't think this is the best team that Kansas City has fielded over the last several years, but yet they're probably going to end up back in the same place. And I'm just like sitting here going, oh man, it could have been a year, right? It could have been somebody else's year. And it very well might be, but Kansas City might back their way into the Super Bowl. And it was a thing that, was always a possibility with Mahomes. But this offense has been putrid for fantasy purposes.
Mm-hmm.
And, and even the things that we've said about Patrick Mahomes, like, oh, he's acting a little bit like a baby this year. You can see, the fire. But that's what you do want a quarterback that's fired up about his team. And when they're not playing well, you want him to show emotion.
Yeah, you don't want him open like Rodgers. That is all true. Yeah.
So that's my thought about Kansas City. What are you thinking about it? Because I know we have different opinions about Kansas City in general.
Yeah, so I do want to talk about Buffalo too.
Oh yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there.
With Kansas City, the main issue I have with them is, I guess this is more of a reality check for the rest of the league that most people miss, especially when they're talking about fantasy projections, is that just because you draft a receiver in the first or second round does not mean they're going to be any good. And Kansas City is actually showing both sides of that fence. Because Sky Moore, last year's second-round pick, essentially is useless. Rishi Rice, second-round pick this year, on fire. Yeah. And if you were to look at the preseason projections, which I stood this here back in June and July, saying I want them both because I don't know which one's going to hit, but one of them is going to hit. Obviously, it ended up being Rice. And I bring this up as a starting point because everyone keeps saying the cast of characters around Mahomes is the worst they've ever been. That's not really the case. His line this year might be the best line he's ever had, in a large part because they're trying to run the ball.
Right. Yeah.
It is not the explosive Tyreek over the top. A large part of that is because Mecole Hardman should not be in the NFL anymore. If you go back to the game against Miami, the wild card weekend, he stopped running on 3 deep balls, and Mahomes basically lost his mind. And you look at this game against Buffalo, he dropped a deep ball that he could have had. And when you look at the number one thing that Kansas City is missing right now, is actually one of the easier things to throw darts at in the draft. And what I mean by that is you don't need to use a first day or second day receiver on it. You can waste 2 5th, 2 6th, or whatever on literally the fastest guy left. Who's the fastest receiver left on the board? And eventually one of the 2 of them, 2 dogs, 1 bone type situation, will learn how to catch a ball from the best passer in the NFL. And if I was Kansas City, that's how I would spend the second day. And, oh, by the way, if they're not getting a receiver, they're your kick returner. Because Clyde Edwards-Helaire ain't good at that either. We can do a big list of things Clyde Edwards-Helaire has been overrated.
Hey, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, yeah. I mean, so you're absolutely right. When it comes to rushing, there are a couple things here that are interesting to note. And this is coming
from people.
This is coming from Pro Football Reference. Okay.
They got moved a lot on defense. Buffalo was moving them too.
So 2012. Okay. So the last time that a Kansas City running back, the most recent time that a Kansas City running back has gotten over 1,000 yards was in 2014.
Oh, it's not going to be Priest Holmes. My first guess when you started this, I was like, it's going to be Priest Holmes, but it's not. Larry Johnson was after Priest Holmes.
Larry Johnson has the record.
Yeah.
In 2006 and 2005, but Jamal Charles in 2014.
A retread.
Or no, Kareem Hunt, my bad. Kareem Hunt, 2017, with 1,327 yards. The one before that was Jamal Charles, 2014, and then Jamal Charles again in 2012. Isaiah Pacheco comes in at number 19 with almost 1,000 yards, 935 yards and 7 touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
So
And he missed not.
Arguably, this has been the best rushing game that Kansas City has trotted out in the last several years. And a lot of that has to do with that line, but that's also to say that the lineman that they got in Taylor is absolute, utter garbage in terms of penalties and forcing Mahomes.
They have things. 4 good linemen and then possibly the worst.
The worst. So when the reason I bring this up is because, like how I said earlier,
he still lines up offside, by the way.
Right. How I said earlier that I don't think this is the best team that Kansas City has trotted out. I do think this is the best defense they've trotted out, and I do think this is the best running game that they've trotted out. But I'm not here as a fan to watch Kansas City's run game. Kansas City's
part of this,
if I'm watching this, and this is just a personal opinion again, if I'm watching a Super Bowl without any analytics, and I hear that Patrick Mahomes is in the Super Bowl, and I hear that Brock Purdy's in the Super Bowl, I'm going to expect Patrick Mahomes to have a better game. And I'm just not 100% sure that that's actually going to happen, because I would dare say that he had one of his worst seasons in his career so far this year.
So let's get into why Kansas City is doing this. So 2-3 years ago, he's chucking the ball over the top, hitting downfield plays consistently. Mahomes is. So what did defenses do? The entire league shifted the don't get beat over the top. This is the same time Jamar Chase was doing his thing going over the top. The whole league overall made the decision, don't get beat over the top. And last year, Mahomes basically went all Brady against it. Rather than handing the ball off and doing a power running game and getting 5 yards a clip, he just threw the ball underneath 20 million times. And he just kept checking everything down. That's in part why his receiving core looks the way it does, because they were built for underneath check down stuffs. You can't change an entire receiving core in 2 off seasons, let alone 1. So what they did schematically was, if you're going to keep giving us light boxes, we're going to learn how to run into them. And that's what Kansas City did. And the thing is that you're right. It's not exciting to watch a power running back sometimes get 2, sometimes get 5, sometimes get 3, sometimes get 5. It's very good if you want to build a stable offense. It's a great way to build around it. Sure, you get the 2-yarders here once in a while, but again, you got Patrick Mahomes. So 2nd and 8 is not a scary thing. It's not like if you're running around with, I don't know, Carroll or Pickens. Those are scary things if you're in 2nd and 8. But with Mahomes or Allen, Burrow, it's nothing. So what we saw really was quarterbacks had to either learn how to throw the ball underneath and becoming okay with that, or hand it off, or throw interceptions. We see different examples of that across the league. Allen threw all the interceptions, didn't care. Mahomes threw it underneath, and then eventually they realized, if we start running the ball more often, it actually will let our line start controlling games more. And that's what Kansas City chose to do, really entering into the postseason last year, but making it an extreme focus this year. And in doing so, this is why I think it's an overrated defense. The defense is never on the field. Kansas City's games used to be the longest taking games in terms of duration of from 1 o'clock kickoff until final score, because there was so much passing in it. Kansas City doesn't live that game. They're not quite Cleveland yet, where it's running the ball constantly, but that's the major difference. And for most fans, you described, Bob, that's not enjoyable football to watch. We'd rather watch Allen chuck it. If it's an interception, so be it, but at least it's a downfield play. Now, the thing with Mahomes is...
but I do want to bring this up, Joe, is that there is that idea here. So in 2023, the year that we just came out of, Kansas City's defense was rated number 4 in terms of yards allowed over the course of the season, and in terms of running, 15th. Okay, so this is a defense that, as you said, and as we've said a lot this year, is that there are certain defenses that you want to pass against, and there are certain defenses that you want to rush against. Because Chandler Jones is a force on that line, like just causing pressure.
That's true, but he can only cover one gap.
You've got to be able to push it in another direction. You've got to be able to open up lanes for your runners so that your passing game can develop. So I would more likely rather run on the Chiefs than I would want to pass on the Chiefs.
Absolutely.
And those stats back that up.
But here's the reason people don't, though. It's because they walk in with the aura of Mahomes. Same reason people don't run on the Bengals or run on Miami, because they think in their head, I need to score 35. And that's not the reality of this Kansas City team at all.
It isn't. And that's the piece of it that we have seen now in 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022. We have seen the Chiefs, or let's include 2018 too. Since 2018, the Chiefs have reached the conference championship game of the AFC every single year. And in that span of time, we have seen an evolution of Patrick Mahomes. We have seen Andy Reid as the coach. We have seen the Tyreek Hill come and go. We've seen this team change in a lot of different ways. Now, going back to 2021 with that loss with the Bengals, that was extremely close. That was a great Bengals team, and it was a good Kansas City offense. Now we have normalized this, and like I said, this isn't anything bad against the Chiefs themselves, but when I come to, as many fans do to a Super Bowl, especially casual fans to a Super Bowl, and they hear Patrick Mahomes, you aren't getting the same version of Patrick Mahomes that you would have gotten 2 or 3 years ago. But I got to ask you, Joe, is this version of Patrick Mahomes that we are seeing today in the playoffs and throughout this season, is it actually a better version of Patrick Mahomes?
Watching
the Patrick Mahomes you'd rather have, and like you said, in the draft this upcoming year, you get a number 2 that's actually a number 2 and not, then you have Rice and Kelsey. Going on.
That's all true. So when you watch the tape of how defenses are treating Kansas City, Patrick Mahomes is getting a lot of respect based on prior credit. That is a fact. This is in part why.
I mean, it's worthy of that.
Oh no, I'm not fighting, because as soon as you don't do too deep cover 2, he will attack you. But there's also a lot of situations that leave easy action that the rest of the league doesn't get. He gets a lot more easy throws thrown his way. With, again, the receiving core is nothing to write home about. If you put them with just an average run-of-the-mill quarterback, this receiving core would be below the half line.
Like Carr.
Like if you traded New Orleans and Kansas City's receiving core, Kansas City would be the 3rd best offense passing in the league. And New Orleans would be bottom 10 for sure. And just by putting Olave out there and Shaheed. That includes moving Kelsey as well. So what you see a lot of when people are attacking Kansas City is, and this is what Baltimore's going to do different, is fear of attacking Kansas City. That's what you really see overall, is that if you go and you just say, hey, I don't think you can run past us. We're going to jam Hartman, and Lazard's not going to be able to do it. If you're willing to do that and you play the entire muck it up in the first 6 yards, this offense gets in trouble. But you have to be willing to roll the dice that Hartman's not going to get behind you. And you have to be willing to jam him. most teams in the league are not willing to take that risk because the second you lose, you're giving up a touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, people are so afraid that Mahomes could put up 35 on you anyway. You enter into a game plan from a state of fear. I guarantee you Baltimore will not do this.
Oh, yeah, no. I mean, you
see it with Denver playing them. You saw them with Peyton, and then the old coach did it. Denver does this always against them. Mm-hmm. You see this with non-division games. Teams that feel they're inferior to Kansas City before they even show up. It is an aura. This is truly how you build a mystique around your entity, and that's what they have done.
So,
to a large degree, I don't think he's playing better. I think he's playing with prestige that he has won and earned. And this is kind of like the pitcher who gets the outside corner pitch, even though it's a ball, it's just given to him. So he keeps taking it. And that's why you're seeing low-scoring games. Where it is coming into effect, though, is when teams run out of room to give him respect as they get closer to the goal line, this offense is slowing down. They're getting field goals when they used to be getting touchdowns. And say what you will about how bad Washington was this year, which they were. They scored in red zone. The enemy was a very good red zone coordinator, and they're missing that right now.
And the stats do back up.
Why their season will end.
Joe, the stats do back up an average team in the red zone. Kansas City was not ranked 19th in the league with 52% success rate in the red zone for touchdowns, and that is just slightly ahead of Denver, Jacksonville, Carolina, Indy, and Vegas, and the Steelers. So that is not really good company to be in. And Baltimore is sixth. So
Baltimore scores
I want to bring this up because I do want to touch on Buffalo, but I want to get to the teams that are still in the playoffs right now.
We got all of season to talk about Buffalo.
Looking at this game ahead, and what we saw was in the game last week with Baltimore and Houston, is that DeMeco Ryans for Houston's head coach was dialing up a lot of blitzes at various points in time in the first half of that game. And you saw that the score was pretty much compact at that point in time. You know, Lamar wasn't really doing Lamar things yet. And as soon as he cooled off from calling those blitzes, we saw Lamar take it for like 82 yards to the house, another Lamar touchdown later in the game. And you know, CJ Stroud had not a great game at all, as we were expecting that might happen, even though we like him as a player, you know. So I got to ask you here, going back to Kansas City's defense and looking ahead to this week's games, is Kansas City's defense built with Chandler Jones, with L'Jarius Sneed in the secondary there, and with a couple other players that they have? Is it built to stop this version of the Baltimore Ravens offense? Because we know that this version of the Baltimore defense stacks up really, really well against Patrick Mahomes.
So Baltimore has built a very challenging offense if you want to spy Lamar Jackson. This is part of
Houston was doing it pretty well.
Well, Gay needs to be 100% full strength in this game for it to work, and there's no indication that that's happening. He left during the game against Buffalo, and if he's not at full strength, I don't see a way where they can stop Lamar, period, especially on the scrambles. So the way that they make this hard, and this is how Flowers comes in the mix as well, is that they basically say, we will get the run-of-the-mill, all washed up, someone who can just run deep forever. They don't even be fast anymore. They're just going to be willing to run deep, the Aguilars of the world. And because no one can tackle Lamar in the pocket because he can play disco with everyone back there, eventually you'll be behind the defense.
Crazy.
He can chuck it to you. So teams know this. So how do you fix that? You either put way more pressure on them, which then opens up the likelihood of you not staying in your running lane or your rushing lane, rather. And then Lamar can dash you. So that's risk. That's the risk with blitzing him. And Kansas City, as soon as they feel panicked, they blitz you. It's what they do because their interior defensive line can't really stand up to an onslaught of power running coming right at you, which Baltimore is very good at. So what makes this incredibly challenging is you either need to try to cover receivers all damn day, which no one in the league can do. Even Ramsey can't do that. You can't cover someone for 7 seconds. Or you need to try to sack Lamar. And when you bring that extra pressure, Flowers becomes the best option because he can do from a stop and start and get you yards. It's been what he's been doing the whole year. Low A dot and then just get you yardage after the catch. Some of it's designed, but a lot of it is hot reads at the line of scrimmage. They're putting pressure so Lamar can't run. We're going to give it to the short or the short down the field athletic guy who's going to make something. They really are doing the Peyton Manning extension of the run. It just doesn't look as clean. But the real winner in all of this is Likely. Isaiah Likely is, quite frankly, aside from Lamar, the MVP of that team. Without Likely, they don't have possession of the middle of the field. And because you have to put backer core on slowing down Isaiah, you then lose the ability to have the spying options on Lamar. So essentially, they're making you, Baltimore is saying, you pick your poison every day. Do you want Lamar to run 20-yard gashes on you left and right until your safeties finally catch him? Or do you want to not cover the tight end? And this tight end has proven he can do it. And I do believe Isaiah Likely is going to score a touchdown. And he is going to carry this day. And quite frankly, the way that you beat Baltimore, there's only really 3 teams that are willing to do it. And that's not being afraid of getting a 15-yard penalty of hitting Lamar in the first half. You have to make Lamar feel pain. And it's the only way you beat him. The Steelers do it, and Cleveland does it to him. That's the only 2 really consistent teams. Seattle used to do it with Carroll to Murray. You got to hit quarterbacks.
I want to bring
Can't say don't do it.
I want to bring this up because it's something that we touched on because we talked about Lamar Jackson in the offseason a lot. A lot of the stuff that we put out about Lamar Jackson was us being very curious about, specifically me, about why he hasn't been signed by the Ravens, why he hasn't been signed by other teams. And statistically speaking, there was a point in time, at the beginning in the offseason where we were talking also about the plateauing of Lamar Jackson's stats and his inability to play a full season. He finally got a chance to play a full season. And he's sitting there with 24 yards as or 24 touchdowns as a passer. And his best yet passing season of 3,600 yards is still only 15th in the league out of quarterbacks. So his value obviously is in that dual threat, perspective there, right? So you look at it and you say, okay, we know that Kansas City has a good rushing defense, but the question I want to ask you and bring it up here is that, and arguably at 821 yards this season,
Kansas City does not have that. That's a myth. Kansas City does not have a good rushing.
I want to go back to what the reason I bring this up is Kansas City. Right now, Lamar has 821 yards rushing on the year, and we said earlier that stat for Kansas City about their rushing defense is better than it actually looks. I meant their pass defense is better than the rush defense. So their rush defense is sitting we said like 15, somewhere in the league like that. So when you have a dual threat quarterback, and when you have a running game that is just okay with Gus Edwards and Justice Hill, again, we talked about this last week where we had teams where they're specialists, where there's the ground and pound.
Oh, imagine those guys.
The guy that could get outside. How much do you feel? Because I feel this is going to be like the script. How much do you feel Lamar is going to run in this game, and how do you feel they're going to take it to them in the running game? Because when we look at last week's game in terms of just in general passing for Lamar, Lamar threw in the 2023. So this is just the game last week, 152 yards. How much running is going to happen in this game for Baltimore? Because it feels like a lot is coming, and it doesn't feel like Kansas City can stop it.
They can't. Buffalo was able to move them around, and Buffalo didn't even think about running the ball until week 7. Baltimore's entire identity for the last 6 years has been power running between the A-gaps, which basically means where Buffalo went right up the middle and pushed Kansas City around left and right, that was a personnel failure of Kansas City. That wasn't scheme. That was I'm physically getting moved. Baltimore showing up with a fullback who's a left guard. He's a 310-pound Picard, and he is going to destroy them. And long story short, this might be boring, but Baltimore is going to run the ball between the guards the entire game, wear down Kansas City, and then every once in a while, Lamar's going to make something shine. And it's going to be incredibly frustrating for Mahomes sitting on the bench and not getting a chance to do anything. Because this Baltimore offense is stronger than Kansas City's defense as a starting point. And then you throw on the fact that their back end might be more athletic than Baltimore's receiver. Sure, fine, but that doesn't matter when you get a running back in your face and a guard pulling up on you. So how much running is going to happen? A lot. It's mostly going to be power plays, and then off of that, little schemes of naked boots and stuff like that of Lamar going off of the power up the middle. The power is the basis of the Baltimore offense. Running up the middle, man on man, I'm going to blow you up and hit you harder than you can hit me. That's how Baltimore rolls. They are very good at it, and they're basically going to break Kansas City in that regard. I do believe that this defense is going to break. Then they're going to panic and start blitzing, and one of 2 things will happen, or one of 3 things will happen in that moment. Kansas City's best case scenario is they get Lamar. In more probability, they're going to lose discipline and Lamar's going to gash them. And then option 3 is Lamar's going to find Flowers on a short thing who will then gash them. So I see the downfield threat for Baltimore being mostly likely with a shade of Beckham, but mostly likely. And because of the way that you have to shadow Lamar, you're not going to be able to really do this. And their only hope is if Gay is at full strength, and it normally is going to be. So I don't see a scenario where they can slow Lamar, but I can see plenty of scenarios where Baltimore can slow Mahomes. Baltimore doesn't get pushed around in the running game. Pacheco is not going to go off, and Baltimore does not worry at all about a mobile quarterback. Patrick Queen is used to chasing Lamar Jackson around all the time, and he is very good at doing it. And by the way, he's not the best linebacker on that team. So when you look at Baltimore's defense, it is a glaring thing that you can still win with elite linebackers. You can make very good defenses with it. And this is going to be a rough day for Mr. Kelsey, as Roquan Smith is just going to own him.
So I want to ask
Kelsey and all your DFS.
I want to ask you this, Joe, based on, before we get to the next game on the list here, is when we were talking about just the stats for these games and just over the whole entire season, I want to ask you, when it comes to looking at these stats, and right now I'm on Pro Football Reference, and I'm just looking up in terms of like attempts that these teams have gotten in terms of running and receiving. Baltimore, and this is something I want to say in terms of your point that you made about Kansas City having to face less in terms of the pass, or less in terms of pass, because they're not so good against the rush. Baltimore actually had 415 attempts on them. The highest in the league was 521 with Arizona. But not far ahead of that is the Kansas City Chiefs, who had 432 rushing attempts against them this year. Now, in the passing game, this reflects those numbers that we thought. They had 556 passes attempted against them and 340 completion. But when we look down here where Baltimore is, they had 634 attempts against them, 415 rushing attempts against them, 634 passing attempts against them, only 384 completions for 3,236 yards.
Okay.
And Kansas City's there are almost 100 less passing attempts and only 200 less yards. Mm-hmm. So the point that you're making, I really like it because it really paints the picture, because this is a team in Baltimore, right, that pound for pound, strength for strength, their strengths could potentially bring out the glaring weaknesses in the defense of Kansas City, and their weak and Baltimore's weaknesses on defense aren't going to be necessarily exposed as bad by this Kansas City team, because these numbers reflect a team that is, not terrible against the rush by any means, right?
Well, the numbers also reflect the standard game script of how it's different in this year for Baltimore and Kansas City.
Because many teams had to go to the pass in order to catch up.
Because Baltimore was blowing much more out than Kansas City. Kansas City got into slow, methodical ball control way faster than Baltimore. Because when Baltimore goes into methodical ball control, they rip off 80-yard runs. Right. Baltimore has so much more explosive in their running game than Kansas City does. That leads to less time of their defense being on the bench because they score more. At the end of the day, I'm telling you guys outright, I'm already the official pick is Baltimore minus the 3.5. I'm personally selling that down to Baltimore minus 6.5. Baltimore is going to win this game, and it's going to be stupid good. And this is coming from someone in Pittsburgh who hates the Ravens. I just know what they are, and I know what Kansas City is from watching the tape. Baltimore is going to win this game emphatically. And it's going to be one of these ones where you're going to see a lot of Taylor Swift in the first half and then an empty box in the second.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think that's true, but I do think that Baltimore is the
it's going to be a 2-score game at least.
But I will say this. Like I said to begin the show, you were never out with Patrick Mahomes. And there is just something about...
never really been hit in the playoffs. Baltimore's Baltimore's the best pass rushing team in the NFL.
Fair. But I still think, in terms of who I want to see, even though we are from Pittsburgh, I would rather see Lamar Jackson in the Super Bowl than Patrick Mahomes, just because at this point in time right now, he might not necessarily not draw more people than Patrick Mahomes to the Super Bowl, but I think that the game overall will be a little bit more exciting with Lamar Jackson in it than with Patrick Mahomes there.
Well, because when we talk about defenses shutting each other down, Kansas City's defense is built to destroy the style that the Niners defense is built to destroy the way Kansas City plays football. Which we can dive into.
Built their team to stop that. They probably built their team to stop that.
We go back into the what I was saying earlier about how 3 years ago everyone was going over the top. That was Tyreek in Kansas City and Chase and all that. And most of the league responded by doing check downs and running the ball. And knowing that, the Niners didn't follow the trend of every other defense of just putting their safeties way back. They said, we're just going to own the first 5 yards. Left to right, sideline to sideline, the Niners own the first 5 yards. You want to do anything wide, anything zone, it ain't happening. The Niners can stop it. If you want to try to beat us over the top, you might crush us, like Baltimore did when they were willing to do it, and like Minnesota did. So to beat the Niners, you have to be willing to take your quarterback getting hit to chuck it downfield. Kansas City can't play that way. So that's another reason to say that. But the Niners have to get through someone first here. And that has been the team that has by far the most 2 combined wins in the playoffs in Detroit. That win over the Rams showed everything that you wanted to see as far as what Detroit might do to blow a game. They didn't get over their heads. They didn't stop going for it on third or going for it on fourth down. And I think the most impressive part about the way Detroit's been playing in the playoffs, you can correct this and look this up, but in both first halves, they only allow their opposition to have 3 meaningful drives. I don't count the one where they take the knee, but they've only allowed 3 meaningful drives for their opposition. That's how much ball control the Detroit offense has been doing. And it doesn't matter who you're playing, but especially when you're playing the best mastermind in the NFL in McVay, not letting him have more attempts is a good thing. And I believe that playing against Shanahan, that's going to be another area. Because when you look at the way that Detroit attacks defenses, they are not a left-to-right style. They will come up the middle with you with a power Monty running game. They will hit you in the intermediates with St. Brown, and they were willing to put Laporta in weird places that tight ends shouldn't be. So when you look at the way that Detroit brings their offense compared to the way the Niners want to defend an offense, it's actually a really good matchup for Detroit in a way that before I started breaking this down, I didn't think was going to happen. When we started
you're definitely worried. Yeah.
I didn't give Detroit a chance in hell of beating the Niners, basically on reputation. But diving into the schemes and projecting for this, I'm more optimistic about Detroit over the Niners than I had been all year.
I mean, I you know me, I am a Detroit fan, and I was really excited to watch this game and to watch last week's game, and always preventing heartbreak, right? But at the beginning of that game, with this Tampa Bay Lions game, outside of the last 2 minutes of the first half, I had commented that the Lions were playing beautifully. That game could not have been going more right for the Detroit Lions, outside of the injuries to their guard and the injury that I thought would have been game-ending for the center. But it touched on something that we spoke about last week, is the drive and the passion of a team that mentally can sometimes overcome talent levels on the field. Now, I'm not saying that San Francisco's not driven, because they are. It's Brock Purdy is young. Ayuk is still fairly young. Debo is young. This is a driven team as well, right? These are players that the last time the Niners won, they weren't on the team, I don't believe, in terms of the offensive talent, right? So you go and you look at Detroit, and Detroit in this game was so hungry. They wanted this game so bad, and when you watched it, the game script at the end of that first half, the game script was all in the Bucs' favor. The Bucs went down, they scored. Detroit was, they looked like the air got taken out of that stadium for a little bit. And then you come back in the third quarter, and that drive by the Lions right at the beginning of the third quarter, and then coming back. The defense
got 3 and out first.
Right. But and you look at it and you say, oh my God, like this is not the way
they were able to stop the momentum, which is very hard to do in the playoffs.
Right. It was becoming something that was really trifling to watch, because punt, right? And then Detroit comes back with that touchdown to break that tie, and you get a touchdown from Craig Reynolds, the guy that Dan Campbell was like, yeah, we need to keep this guy on the roster because he's a good character guy. He might not be the most talented guy on our team, but if we lose him, we lose the team, right? And this mentality of team, of unity from Dan Campbell And it was touched on by all the players in the interviews after the game. Jared Goff touched on it. Aiden Hutchinson touched on it. The linebacker, Banks, I believe it was Banks, that came and got that interception late in the game against Baker. The Bucs played a good game. The Buccaneers played a good game. You could not have asked for a better game. I mean, not statistically wise, but
Baker
matchup wise. You couldn't ask for Baker Mayfield to have had a better game outside of that interception from C.J. Gardner-Johnson and then that late game interception there. So, I mean, like, this was all I was confident at one point in time that the Lions were going to win this game, no questions asked. And then I was not confident.
Mm-hmm.
I was not confident. And so going into this game in San Francisco, I know I was talking to you and I was talking to a couple other people here, is the fact of this team being so behind the mentality of team that even if Detroit's defense is not as good talent-wise,
mm-hmm.
there is this mentality. And I think the story of Ragnow fits it the best, is that I have lost so much that even though I am hurt, even though I am not healthy, I am playing.
Mm-hmm.
I have done too much in my career as a player to be this close and give up. And
mm-hmm.
although this Lions team is fairly young, they do have veterans on this team that they will fight for. And these veterans, although they might not be the best, Ragnow is one of the best. But you look at it and you say, this team is hungry, and taking all talent, all statistics off the table, it feels like they want it more. And I'm not giving anything away from San Francisco because they also want it. Everybody does. But that narrative and that it cannot be lost in this game, because guys like Craig Reynolds, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, even all these young guys and the old guys are coming together and saying, it's our time. It's our time to show up. It's our time to play. And even if we're not the best team on the field, we are going to make ourselves believe we are the best team on the field, and we are going to do it. The only thing I'm worried about in this game against San Francisco is this idea of Dan Campbell and the turnover game. Dan Campbell wants to make turnovers, and you saw what he was willing to give up in order to potentially create a turnover, because there looked like a lot of busted coverages against Mike Evans and a couple other wide receivers in this game. Detroit's defense played the hand that they dealt themselves, and they ended up winning. But this could have very easily have been a loss. And Aiden Hutchinson is amazing. There is no doubt in my mind that guy is going to continue to be, a player to watch, right? But what they started doing late in this game and the pressure that they were causing with Aiden Hutchinson, that type of pressure against this McCaffrey team, I don't think that the back end of Detroit is good enough to keep getting that pressure that they kept on getting on Baker Mayfield in this game. I don't think the back end is good enough to be able to stop the likes, and even that middle, to stop the likes of Christian McCaffrey, to stop the likes of Debo if he's healthy again, to stop George Kittle going down the field. Because we saw what Cade Otton did. Cade Otton had a pretty good game. Not an amazing game, but he was open. There was a point in time where he was open for two straight drives. And Sam Laporta, for his end on Detroit, came up, showed up, played great, still not 100% healthy. So we have this battle of tight ends, Kittle and Laporta, that these linebacking cores are going to have to contest and contend with. And to be honest, linebacking core of the San Francisco 49ers is just much better than the Detroit Lions.
Best in the league behind Baltimore.
Right? And so you have a guy in Jared Goff who has seen the Niners defenses before. It's the same defenses he saw the last time he was playing with the Rams, essentially. Not totally, but the way they play, very similar. So the question needs to beg here, Joe, is that there is a pathway for Detroit to win. But with the mentality of this is our time, we will make them make mistakes kind of mentality, you open yourself up to be very defeatable. And you have a lot of voids. And Dan Campbell, like we said earlier, is a coach that brings out the best of his players, even if his players aren't the best.
Mm-hmm.
It is very clear that the weakest part of any of these teams is the Detroit Lions secondary. Granted, the secondary of the Niners isn't that great either, but it's the strong play up front makes up for that weakness. So, but the Lions line, let me finish here. I know it's long-winded, but the Lions line took a hit with the guard going down, and the Niners line has all kinds of all-pro talent on it, and they're going to get after Ragnow. They know he's hurt. They're going to get after Sewell, who's amazing. They're going to get after these guys, and they're going to pressure them in ways that I don't think that they've seen this season or in the playoffs yet. And I'm concerned at the mentality of going into this game with that of it's definitely going to help. But when push comes to shove, we talked about Miami not being able to shove back and a couple other teams not able to shove back. They're going to shove back, but when is too little going to be too late? And do you think that's going to happen?
So let's start the matchup with Detroit's defense. You're exactly right. They want to play turnover ball. They want to force you into stuff. And this is an incredibly rare statement to be able to say about a team, but it's definitely true to this team. If they play Baltimore in the Super Bowl, it'll even be truer then. From wild card weekend to divisional weekend, each week subsequent, the quarterback they have played against has worse arm talent than the one they played the previous week. Baker Mayfield is a better arm than Brock Purdy, who has a better arm than Lamar Jackson. All of that is true. And they shut down the best of them so far in Stafford. Mm-hmm. So where the issue is going to come to pass is two-folded for Detroit. Mm-hmm. As you said correctly, the weakest part of that game will be Detroit's secondary. And one thing that Kyle Shanahan has shown repeatedly is that if he finds a vulnerability, he will keep attacking it and attacking it and attacking it until you can't cover. He's still scoring on Adams against Seattle in their back cover 3. Like, it's still happening. But you look at this, as soon as you have a vulnerable weakness, Shanahan will exploit it, especially as you overreact to try to protect your own weakness, which is a natural human being thing. So if Detroit is going to win this game, they will win it through their pass rush, and they will win it through stopping the running game of McCaffrey. That being said, no one has done that yet. Even the games the Niners have lost, they got outscored. Minnesota basically got 3 Hail Marys in that game, if you really break down how they won. And I don't see a really big scenario where the Niners offense gets slowed down dramatically. They might get maybe only able to get the 3rd gear instead of 6th gear, but they still going to be going. I don't think that's true for Kansas City, to give you a basis for the other game of the day. So to me, when you ask, are they going to be able to win? Mm-hmm. This really comes down to, will Goff be willing to get hit and put the ball downfield? Mm-hmm. That is how you beat the Niners. And the challenge with that is it's a little bit contrary to the way Detroit's been playing with long possessions. Mm-hmm. So if it also comes to pass that the guard and the center are healthy and they can do power running, particularly with Monty, even though I have my own personal problems with Monty, Detroit should be in the driver's seat for this game.
Oh, yeah. I'm there.
But I don't – if it comes down to whoever has the ball last and it looks like the Niners could, game's going to be over. Because I don't see a scenario where Detroit's defense, with the exception of Purdy throwing the ball away, is going to be able to stop them. I basically think it's an interception or bust defensive scheme, which Detroit is good at making. That Hutchinson has been getting a lot of love these last couple of weeks as the playoffs have been going on. He's not top 5. I don't even want to try to say it is. But he's definitely in the very good category.
Oh, yeah.
So when you look at this, they have the capability of getting pressure without blitzing. If their linebacking core can shut down the running game from the Niners, and it comes down to Purdy has to beat them with his arm, you then have a chance for interceptions.
Well, you
also have a chance for getting completely and utterly gashed.
Well, this is when it comes to the running game, and I do 100% agree with you that this game is probably going to be won in which running game is able to get the advantage against the opposing defense, because the Niners and the Lions are second and third in terms of yards allowed by run. So the Lions have allowed 1,509 and the Niners 1,525. Now, when we go to passes, and the Lions have been rushed on more.
Yeah. The thing is, you can't run against the Niners that much because eventually you're getting blown out.
Right. Yeah. So they've been rushed on more. But and this is coming from Pro Football Reference here, is Detroit, and so obviously these stats are a little odd here, is that Detroit has let up 588 attempts passing. And the Niners have let up 621 this season. And Detroit has let up more yards, 4,205, and the Niners have let up 3,642. But the amount of completions that is the difference there is about 40. So the Lions have let up 40 less completions, but over almost 700 more yards. So obviously, like we said, that weakest unit on the field is that passing game.
Sure is.
But this run game, Detroit needs to, in order to win this game, Detroit needs to control this clock. Detroit needs to absolutely unequivocally be in control this entire game. And the same thing goes against the Rams from last week. Again, another NFC West opponent. That got dodgy. Late. And the Lions have not been able to put either of the teams that they've faced away. That is a concern when it comes to the Niners, because the Niners can put you away and you won't be able to resuscitate yourself. We saw the Packers gave them a game. The Packers gave them a game in the driving rain. Jordan Love could have won that game, but decides to throw it crossbody across. I don't even know.
It's a Green Bay thing, dude. It's what all of them do. It's Green Bay thing.
But anyway, they tried and they almost won. And San Francisco, for their credit, like we were saying, even with all those stars on the front, their run game did not look as good as it did. Their run defense did not look as good as it did earlier in the year. Aaron Jones was given a lot of space. And we know that we both love Aaron Jones. We think Aaron Jones is an incredible running back. But Jahmyr Gibbs is also an incredible running back. Yeah. Now, the question that I have for you is, if the guard and the center are at 75% or whatnot, and we're treated with a Jahmyr Gibbs outside run game, how does that stack up? Because we do know that Bosa and Young and the linebacking core of Warner and
Greenlaw really
are really good at getting sideline to sideline, like you said, within that first 5 yards. So where is that matchup for Gibbs? Because Gibbs could be the factor in this game. Because once you can establish Gibbs, you can establish Laporta. And once you can establish Laporta, you could potentially establish Gibbs, and vice versa. These two work very symbiotic with one another. Who do you think gets started first? and can they keep it going?
Well, let's put it bluntly. If the center and guard aren't able to play, they're not winning. It's easier to run on the Niners between the guards than it is outside the tackles. The Niners, like I said, they're built to handle the perimeters and just attack and murder the first 5. You cannot run a wide receiver screen or any of these short passes against the Niners. It does not, period. So you got to go over the top with them. That being said, from a running perspective, it's better to go right at them up the middle. As good as Greenlaw is, and more so Warren is, because Warren plays in the middle, when they get attacked immediately, their defensive tackles can't protect them. This is not like the old school Tony Siragusa is sitting up there keeping Ray Lewis clean. Warren doesn't have that protection. Or Warner doesn't have the protection, rather. So at the end of the day, I believe Monty to be more important than Gibbs from running the ball, because Monty's the one who runs up the middle. That being said, if they do run with Gibbs, I'd like them to just use the Monty plays and stick it up the middle, because I think that's really the only true weak point in that front 7. The Niners' back 4 also isn't that great either. It's just
it isn't. It's
just not. And that's why, like I said, if you're willing to let your quarterback be hit, you can go on them.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's one team that shows we will deal with pain and fight through it, it's Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
And spread 7 right now. I'm taking the points. I'm taking Detroit plus the 7. And I think we're going to see the upset. I think we're going to see a 1 versus 3 in the Super Bowl. I just hope that it's scheduled to be this 1 versus 3, whereas Detroit and Baltimore.
Just as an exciting aside here, Detroit Lions tickets last week at home hit a high of over $1,000.
Sure.
For that game, because I mean, once in a lifetime experience here. If we just go on StubHub really quickly to see what the ticket prices of this game are, tickets are selling fast in San Francisco. We know San Francisco Stadium is in a weird place. Not a completely entirely great stadium, but definitely has a lot of room. The lowest price ticket right now on StubHub, $454 for section 405. Now, Joe, if I remember correctly, when we went to go see San Francisco to Steelers many moons ago, we were looking into that wall of
yeah, but that's not a factor in this.
No. And that was the visitor side, correct?
The wall of windows is on the home side.
Okay, we were in section like 223, right? Something like that. Tickets in section 223 start at $709.
They're good seats, man. I gotta tell you.
And these tickets, the closer, because you gotta assume that Detroit, being a city that has not had their fair share of wealth in the last couple of years, that the traveling base of Detroit doesn't have a large following of Detroit, travelers. They're trying their best to show up in this game.
Oh, I hope they do.
And there's probably going to be some plants from other teams wearing Detroit gear just because they want to see Detroit win this game and nobody else. Because let's face it, that would be a Super Bowl we haven't seen before, right? Detroit versus the Ravens, who we think might win as well. If that were to pass, that would be a great game, right? Anywhere this comes, these 4 teams that are left, outside of what we saw from Green Bay last week, I think this year has been one of the better playoffs that we've seen. Even though we had some drubbings in the first round, it really cleared the wheat from the chaff there, because the teams that we have now, they can play, and they can play offense. All of these teams can play offense, and the defense. This defense, it's a concern here. So, final thoughts as we start to wrap our episode up here. in this championship week, Joe?
Well, like I said, I think that Detroit in the 7 points is definitely the play.
Mm-hmm.
Baltimore minus all. If you're into selling points, Baltimore minus 6.5 is very juicy, and I think Baltimore is going to just be able to have no doubt in this game at any point that Baltimore belongs in that Super Bowl. I don't see a scenario where Kansas City is able to stop the running game, and Kansas City, the fact that they get tied up in the red zone with the pressure of the Ravens defense does not add up to being able to keep up with what Lamar's going to put on this table. I think Lamar's might cover the over-under by himself. Baltimore is going to go off. There's no other way I can say this. Baltimore's going to be in the Super Bowl. They're going to be a crazy, ridiculously overrated team going into the Super Bowl. And I'm calling out that play already. I will be taking Detroit on the money line in the Super Bowl over the Baltimore Ravens.
Detroit fans love you right now, Joe. Picking Detroit to win, it's definitely the popular play for a lot of people.
Well, yeah, part of this is that Kyle Shanahan is very good in a lot of ways. And again, if he finds weakness, he will exploit it. I love that about him. When Brock Purdy messes up, which he does under pressure, he messes up horribly. Just not enough teams have been able to exploit it. Mm-hmm. Detroit, who's only going to play for the interception, I believe will. It's also going to mean they're going to get dashed. The second game will score more points than the first, without a doubt. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be a lot more entertaining for those who want to see big plays in the Niners attempt, provided that Goff stays upright. So if that happens, I think Detroit will be able to win it.
Goff has to definitely limit turnovers, limit sacks. He showed that, to their credit, last week, Tampa Bay was putting a lot of pressure on Goff in the second half of that game, mm-hmm. and causing Goff to make bad throws, causing Goff to make incompletions. But Goff, for his credit, was staying as upright as he could in delivering the ball. And as a veteran quarterback, they couldn't be in a better place right now as the totality of the team. And when you look at San Francisco, when you're saying about Brock Purdy, both of these quarterbacks are capable of making big mistakes. And the question is which defense, for me at least, which defense is more likely to cause those mistakes, and which defense is, come fourth quarter, is going to still be playing with that same fire, that same passion as you might see.
Well, I don't think you need to worry about that from the defense in this one, but I do got to say, from the NFC Championship, Detroit is much more likely to cause a turnover. The Niners are much more likely to cause a punt, and it just which happens more of which. Statistically speaking, punts are more likely than the turnovers. Mm-hmm. So that's the fear for Detroit. Obviously, Detroit's on the road and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But again, 7 points is way too much. I want to see the game, but like I said, I'm definitely taking the points. I do think that this is going to be the best game to watch, mostly because I literally think we're just going to see Lamar literally run away with it.
And I have to wash my hands of it all because I can't give anything as a fan of the team that's playing because I can't be toxic about it. I just got to analysis only. Love
you guys. We'll be with you here for the Super Bowl next week. We're obviously every Tuesday here for the rest of the offseason. Next week, Bob, we are going to dive into teams that need to start thinking about how to rebuild themselves, where they need to go, because we're already at that phase. And then the week of the Super Bowl itself, we will obviously be breaking down that.
There's definitely a lot of them.
Oh, there is. Let's